I'm going to be revealing some secrets, spilling some beans, spilling some stuff that companies and reviewers don't want you to know. AKA, I'm going to show you guys the fastest, most efficient, and most cost-effective way on reaching your endgame or your dream IEM. But before we dive in, I do have an announcement to make. This is going to be my last video for a while and maybe even indefinitely. I made a separate video explaining my reasoning, but I just want to take the time right now to really just thank everyone for all your support, your kind words, and all the memories we made on this channel. Without you guys, I definitely couldn't have kept going, so I'm very grateful for everyone watching. I want to end things on a strong note, which is why I made this guide for you guys. But with all that sappy stuff out of the way, here is the ultimate IEM upgrade guide. Let's just jump into it. For starters, I'm going to be separating the paths into different categories such as a warm tuning or the most resolving IEM category, etc. I'm doing this because many listeners already have their favorite signature and they're simply just looking for the best in that area. If you don't, no worries, I also included an all-rounder category. Don't worry guys, no need to take notes or anything. You can check out the full list in the description. So just enjoy the video for now. After splitting the paths, I'll be comparing each category with their cheaper counterpart to their more expensive counterpart based on the graph. Ideally, anything over $100 should have at least 3 drivers. So one for every frequency, one for the bass, one for the mids, one for the highs, and at least 2 crossovers. So from the bass to the mids and the mids to the treble. This is just to ensure that every driver is taking care of a specific frequency and really allows the maximum potential for detail retrieval and separation. Additionally, as you move up the ladder from more expensive IEMs, you want to pick more reputable brands such as Dunu and Softwares like the SA6 and the RS5, which all have very good timbre and coherency. These older and more established brands will be better when it comes to driver implementation and just crossover design and coherency in general. But again, there are also new upcomers like 7 Acoustics that you should be on the lookout for. Something else to keep in mind is that for certain smaller single dynamic drivers like the IE200 and the IE600, they'll typically boost their bass and treble more to compensate for their smaller driver size. So even though it might look like a lot on the graph, they actually don't sound as much as the graph would suggest. A rule of thumb for that is that I would usually just subtract 3 dBs from the bass and the treble on the graph, and usually that's where it actually sounds like. Side note, if you're wondering what this is the Chimera Dual. I was sent to it to review it, so this video will be recorded entirely with this mic. But as for the IEM, it's another slightly V-shaped IEM. If you can get both for around $100, then I would say it's worth it. But the IEM itself is just another V-shape. Now back to the topic. So the graph isn't going to be 100% accurate, obviously, but throughout my time here, I have found it to be tremendously helpful and very accurate. I would say 80%, 90% estimation, and it's what I use personally to buy my own IEMs based off of. And so far, I have not regret any of my decisions. Besides the Diva, but that's QC, so I guess that doesn't really count. Of course, I'm not saying the graph is everything, but in this context, it's definitely very helpful and more than enough to have an educated guess. Either way, after researching the graph, you want to, of course, cross-check it with other reviewers and just the sentiment around the IEM, the set in general. That aside, let's start off with the warm and bassy signature. So with sets like these, you want to focus mainly on the low end. You're looking at around a 5 to 10 dB bass boost from IEF neutral that stops at around 400 Hz. And as for the warm signature, you want a more mid-bass focused signature, so more mid-bass over sub-bass, something like the Twilight and the Turi. Either one works, just don't pick a graph that has both a lot of mid-bass and sub-bass, or else it just turns into a bass head set. And make sure you don't pick a set that has too much bass and too much treble at the same time, or else it just turns into a V-shaped set like the CRA. For bassy signature, in general, you want to have a 70 dB bass glide up to the 200 Hz mark, and you want it to be around 64 dBs of bass at the 200 Hz mark. As for a warmer set, you want to have a more rounded straight glide into the 800 and up to 1000 kHz. So this should be usually around a 3 to 5 dB boost from IEF neutral. With both signatures, you want to have enough vocal gain to cut through the bass and also enough treble extension to not sound dark and congested. So anywhere along the IEF curve will be fine. An upgrade path for a warm and bassy signature would start off with something like the Blondes at 300, and then you move up to the JD7, and eventually to the Meteor or the Up if you want a bassy signature, or to the Twilight if you want a warm signature. Again, for the more expensive IEMs in every category, you want to find a set that has at least 3 drivers, so 1 in every frequency, and at least 2 crossovers that helps with detail retrieval. The only exception to this is in a warm signature that has a very high quality dynamic driver, as well as having a very sophisticated vent design, so like the Twilight for example. But that aside, try to go for at least 3 drivers and 2 crossovers. As for a bass headset, anything with a lot of bass, so at least 10 dBs away from the IEF neutral is good. You don't want anything too dark or recessed, but enough extension, so try and follow the IEF neutral line, and a little bit downward sloping is fine as well. So something like the Ross Finch to the Thor Mark II and then to the My Usual Minis will be more than enough for bass sets in terms of overall quantity. Next, for a neutral set, you want something along the lines of IEF neutral, so something with little bass here. An upgrade path for this would look something like going from the Ola to the Hexa to the Studio 4s. I'm skipping the ER2SC because, well, the fit is pretty bad. And I know I said little bass, but it's almost next to impossible to find more expensive sets with little or neutral bass. So it is what it is. Moving on, we have the all-rounder category, and this is actually very similar to the neutral, but just has more bass and also very similar Harman curve. Again, you want to follow the IEF neutral for the upper mids and treble, but the only difference is that you want to have a 3 to 5 dB bass boost up to 300 Hz. So these are your Warners, your Holas, your Arias of the world, and for my recommendation, I will start with the EW100P and then go to the Olina SC and end it off with the Zen's top. You can also go for the EJ07M over the top, but really depends on your preferences. The EJ07M is going to have better vocals and a more holographic staging, where the top is going to be airier and have more treble detail and just more energetic in general. As for treble heads, or those looking for the most treble detail, you want to have a slight boost in the upper mids and the early treble and late treble, so in the 8 to 15K region as well as the 15K plus region. A sub bass boost is also fine, but just keep it reasonable around 5 to 7 dBs from IEF neutral, and you want to have a leaner mid bass so it doesn't bleed into the mid range, the upper mids, and affect the overall clarity and detail of the signature. An upgrade path for the best extended treble would be the EW100P, and then you move up to the IE200, and then you move up to the top, and eventually the Helios. V-shape wise, you want something similar to the treble headset, but with more bass, and the treble doesn't have to be as smooth dynamically, so it can have more peaks in the upper mids and the treble, giving that more exciting and energetic, lively feeling to the treble. An example of this would be the Kiwi Years Dolls. Yes, I'm still pronouncing it the Dolls, or any of the V-shape IEMs in my V-shape tier list. And then you move up to the Ico OH10s, and eventually I would have recommended the Elysian Annihilator, but you know, it's Elysian, so hard pass on that. Instead, if you really want to spend that extra cash, you can get the Empire Ears Legend X or Evo. Basically, you want a 5 to 10 dB boost from the bass and a 5 dB boost-ish from the treble, and no scoop in the mid bass, so no variations or anything like that, because it's gonna make the overall signature sound a lot thin, a lot fatiguing, and just less fun and impactful. If you want a slightly bright, a slight V-shaped signature, then you can look for something like the Kailua, and then the top, and then the Z1R. Soundstage wise, it gets a little bit trickier because it's mostly psychoacoustics as well as based off of each person's individual ear anatomy. But in general, you want to find something that has a open and grand presentation. So usually they have a scoop along the mid bass or the mids, or a more recessed or leaner or flatter upper mids vocal region. The scoop in the lower mids as well as the more recessed and flat vocals gives more room for instruments as they're more pushed back, as well as having a good amount of air and treble extension allows that airy feeling of openness in the stage. An example of this would be the SA6 Ultra or the SA6 Mark II. They have leaner mid bass as well as having a flatter gain and vocal region with very good air and treble extension. More expansive examples would be like the Mess, the U12T, the Z1R, where there's a scoop somewhere along the mid bass or the mids as well as a flatter vocal and gain region. However, shell material as well as acoustic design inside the shell matters a lot because it affects on how the sound bounces as well, again, your anatomy in general. The acoustic chamber design as well as the ventilation can heavily affect how we perceive the soundstage on sets like the Dark Magician, the Ico OH10, as well as the Olina SC, which all have metallic shells with some sort of different vent and chamber inside it. So be on the lookout for sets that have a reputation of having a holographic staging, and just really dive into it, the reviews, the overall community sentiment over the set before, purchasing it. If possible, of course you want to demo it, but I know not everyone has a chance to do so. An upgrade path for the most airy and open soundstage would be something like the IE200, moving up to the SA6 Mark IIs, and then the Z1R, the MES, the Dromedas, and the U12Ts. Personally, I wouldn't spend that much on staging alone because it's mostly psychoacoustics, and you really can't tell that much of a difference, but I mean, hey, if you got the cash. As for the most 3D and holographic set, it really comes down to reputation, reviews, and the overall community sentiment regarding that set. For example, I would get the Olina SC and then move up to the T2s. If you listen at mid-volume, then the T2s are going to be more than enough. You don't need the EG07M because the differences are very small, almost non-existent. However, in certain scenarios, if you listen at very high volumes, then I would still upgrade to the OG EG07 because it's still the most 3D, most holographic, and most immersive set I have ever heard. On the other hand, if you want a quote-unquote dark sounding set that scales very well, you want to find an IEM that has a downward sloping upper mids and treble from the IEF neutral, as well as having a leaner mid bass so it doesn't congest and bloat the overall sound. With this signature, start with the DZ4 and just save up for the OG EG07. You really don't need anything else in between unless you can get your hands on the original Manger T, then yeah, but if you can't, don't sweat it. Next are vocals, my favorite category, and here I'm going to split it into 3 different paths. So you can have a forward signature, a more normal traditional signature, as well as a more recessed and laid back vocal presentation. If you like forward vocals, then look for a graph with a fuller gain region in the 1 to 3K region, so something along the lines of Harman and diffuse field tuning. An upgrade path to this would be starting with the Warner and then moving up to the OG C Audio Yume and eventually to the Softgears RS5, which is my favorite personal vocal IEM. As for a more recessed presentation, you want to look for a graph with a very flat gain region in the vocals, so something like the SA6 Ultra and the SA6 Mark II. For this, you can start off with the IE200 and then move up to the original Dunu SA6 and then eventually the MES Mark IIs. And finally, for the more traditional presentation, you want something in between too little and too much, so something like the Monarchs and the Red. So an upgrade path would be starting with the Red, you move up to the original Oracles and then ending off with the Monarch Mark IIs. Either way, for the most natural vocal timbre, you want to have extension in both the low end as well as the treble, so you want to have 3 to 5 dBs of bass around the 300 Hz mark, as well as having some sort of treble extension along the IEF neutral mark. And I'm not including the Diva because of the QC and customer service issues, even though it's probably the best when it comes to vocals at mid-volume. And finally, for the most resolving, clean and technical set, you want to look for a graph that's as smooth as possible, so very little masking, very little peaks and dips. For this, you want it to have a leaner mid bass for clarity and separation, so ideally it shouldn't be more than 3 or 5 dBs past 200 Hz. As for the treble, you also want it to have very well extended treble, so somewhere along the IEF neutral line or a few dBs above it. Additionally, you also don't want a big gain in the 1 to 3K region, as it's going to push the vocals more forward, giving you less space for instruments and separation in general. Ideally, you want it to be as smooth as the IEF neutral line, but that's most likely not going to happen, so just avoid huge dips and peaks that shadow and masks each other. For this, you want to start off with the Red and then move up to the Blessing 3 and then eventually the Supernova or the Sense Top if you can't get the Supernova, because I realize the Supernova's wait time is like super long. If you have the cash and the curiosity, then you can go for the Onoli VX, but again, that's over $2,000, so. And please do cross-check the graph with other reviews and sentiment in the community, because there are a lot of unique sets like the U12T that doesn't translate very well on the graph. But yeah, I hope you guys found this guide to be helpful. You can check out the description in the link in the description. But that side, thank you guys so much for all the support you shown me throughout these past few months. Honestly, it's been such a blast and honor to just be part of this community and just be part of this growth with everyone here. This is a bittersweet moment for sure, and I'm not sure when I'll be back, but I know for certain that I'm not going to forget the memories I made with everyone on this channel. But with that said, I'll see you guys until next time. Take care of yourselves and peace.